The alarms hadn't started yet. The sun hung low over Falcon Ridge Airbase, painting the runway in molten gold as engines hummed in their metal shells. Sergeant Leona Ward wiped the grease from her hands and stepped back from the jet she'd been repairing for the last 3 hours. She had warned the pilot twice that the turbine microfracture wasn't something to ignore, but LT. Carson wasn't the type to listen. He marched toward her now, helmet tucked under his arm, impatience glued to his face. "Move," he snapped, waving her aside like she was blocking his reflection. "You're just a mechanic. I'll handle the flying." His voice echoed across the hangar, drawing a few smirks from nearby crew. Leona didn't react. She never did. She simply stood there, steady, calm, as if she'd heard far worse from far more powerful men. But her eyes sharp, calculating, flicked to the sky for half a second, as though she sensed something no one else did. Then the sirens shattered the air. Red lights spun to life across the base, bathing the hangar in warning crimson. A radio tech's voice cracked through the loudspeakers, urgent and terrified. "All personnel brace for impact. Unauthorized drone swarm inbound. Estimated arrival. 3 minutes." The words froze everyone. Pilots dropped their gear. Technicians stumbled out of the way. Even Carson's smug confidence drained instantly from his face, but not hers. Leona turned slowly toward the horizon, watching the barely visible swarm glinting like black sparks in the fading light. Her jaw tightened just once, quiet, controlled. She didn't waste time asking questions, blaming people, or shouting orders. Instead, she stepped forward with a purpose that made Carson's breath catch in his throat, though he didn't understand why yet. For months she had been invisible on this base, another pair of hands tightening bolts, checking fuel lines, patching wings. No one thanked her for saving. Most never learned her full record. A few thought they knew her rank, none knew her past. Leona Ward wasn't here for recognition. She wasn't here to argue with pilots who thought arrogance counted as skill. She was here because the Pentagon assigned her quietly, discreetly, without announcing what she'd really done in her previous unit. A unit so sealed in classified ink that even senior officers weren't allowed to speak its name. She'd blend in, she'd perform. She fixed things. That was how she survived. But now the airbase was seconds away from an attack designed to wipe out every plane, every crew member, every civilian shelter tucked behind the hangars. Jets were grounded. Systems were offline. The counterattack station had been abandoned years ago, too old, too complex, too unpredictable. No one on base knew how to operate it, except her. She had trained on it in the kind of missions the government never admitted existed. Missions where one mistake meant an empty transport plane returning home. Missions where she learned how to calculate trajectories faster than the software, override systems manually, and fire defense arrays no one else could even turn on. Carson looked at her again, really looked, and for the first time he saw something he hadn't seen before, a quiet, deadly focus in her posture. She wasn't panicking. She wasn't confused. She was preparing. Her fingers, still stained with engine oil, curled slightly as if her muscles remembered switches and triggers she hadn't touched in years. She didn't wait for permission or validation. In the chaos of blaring sirens and scrambling personnel, she simply stepped past Carson, past the pilots who once ignored her, past the officers shouting over one another, and started walking with purpose toward the old control bunker. 3 minutes, that was all she had. 3 minutes to save an entire airbase. And she moved like someone who had already accepted the responsibility. LT. Carson's boots clapped sharply against the hangar floor as he approached the jet, frustration already boiling in his voice. Leona stood beside the open turbine panel, carefully reviewing the crack she had warned him about, thin as a needle, but deadly at full thrust. "Why isn't this bird ready?" Carson barked, tossing his helmet onto the cockpit seat. She met his stare, steady and professional. "Sir, flying with this fracture risks catastrophic failure. The engine needs at least an hour." Carson scoffed loudly, making sure everyone heard. "You're a mechanic, not an engineer." "I asked for a jet, not a lecture." A few crew members exchanged awkward glances, but no one stepped in. Leona didn't argue. She simply closed the panel, wiped her hands, and stood silent as he stormed off again. Respect didn't matter to her, only safety did. She didn't know she'd soon prove why. The calm hiss of the airbase evaporated when the first alarm wailed. Red lights flickered across the hangar, turning metal walls into glowing warning beacons. Technicians froze mid-step, pilots abandoned their coffee cups, and Carson spun back toward the runway as if yanked by an invisible rope. A voice erupted from the loudspeakers, shaken, breathless. Unidentified drone swarm approaching. All personnel find cover. The base descended into chaos. Carson leapt into his jet, slamming switches, trying desperately to start it. The engines groaned, sputtered, then died completely, choking on the very fracture she warned him about. He cursed, slamming the controls. Meanwhile, Leona didn't look panicked, just focused. She scanned the runway, eyes narrowing as the swarm grew from dots to shadows. Every second mattered. She knew grounded jets couldn't protect anyone. And she knew exactly what system could if she reached it in time. Chief Engineer Morales sprinted toward Leona, breath ragged, eyes wide. "Ward, you trained on the Sentinel counter systems, tell me you did." The surrounding crew stared at her like she was suddenly speaking a different language. Carson blinked, confused. What counter systems? Morales ignored him, gripping Leona's arm. "The old AGIS Mini. No one else here knows how to operate it." Leona hesitated only a moment, then nodded. The base wasn't just in danger, it was minutes from destruction. She dropped her wrench, adrenaline cutting through her veins, and broke into a run toward the forgotten bunker buried beside the runway. As she sprinted, the narrator within the world shifted. She was no longer the quiet mechanic. She was the classified air defense specialist from a unit erased from public records. She had fired systems designed to stop attacks no one ever admitted happened, and she was about to fire one again. The bunker door slammed open, dust spiraling through the air as Leona rushed inside. The obsolete console hummed weakly, lights flickering like a dying heartbeat. She powered it manually, flipping breakers the newer recruits didn't even know existed. The drone swarm was now less than 3 minutes away, fast, coordinated, deadly. "Ward, can you get this running?" Morales shouted from the doorway. She didn't answer. Her fingers were already dancing across the controls, initializing systems, rerouting power, forcing the decades-old array back to life. Sparks snapped from a frayed cable. Carson attempted to step in. "Let me move," she ordered sharply, without looking up. He obeyed instantly. The targeting screen flickered, revealing a cloud of metallic shapes cutting through the horizon. She calibrated angles faster than the automated AI, her mind calculating trajectories like second nature. Time bled away. 1 minute left. Then 30 seconds. She readied the firing keys. The entire base held its breath as Leona activated the firing sequence. A deafening blast ripped through the bunker as the first wave of interceptors streaked skyward like white-hot spears. Outside, personnel ducked as explosions lit the horizon. 1 drone, then 5, then 20 disintegrated midair, raining harmless fragments onto the empty field. Morales stared at the radar. "She's hitting every one of them." Carson pressed closer to the glass, stunned. But the swarm wasn't finished. A second wave surged forward faster, tighter in formation. Leona adjusted the trajectory, fingers flying across the panel. The system's metal frame vibrated under the strain, warning lights flashing yellow, then red. She overrode every limit. Fired again. The sky erupted a second time, a chain of controlled detonations carving a protective dome around the base. When the final blip vanished from the radar, silence swept the room. She had stopped all of them. When Leona stepped out of the bunker, smoke drifted through the pink twilight sky. The base was intact, planes untouched, lives saved. Officers gathered around her with stunned expressions, unsure whether to salute or simply stare. The commanding officer approached first, voiced low with disbelief. "Sergeant Ward, you saved more than 300 people today." Leona nodded once, humility etched into every quiet movement. Carson made his way to her, helmet still in hand, but his arrogance gone. "I misjudged you," he admitted, eyes lowered. She met his gaze without resentment. "Just listen next time." He nodded like a student receiving a lesson he desperately needed. As the adrenaline faded, she returned to her toolbox, picking up the wrench she dropped earlier. To everyone else, she had become a hero in 3 minutes, but to her, she was simply returning to the job she'd always done silently, flawlessly. The sun had fully dipped below the horizon by the time the base settled, leaving only a soft orange glow behind the distant hangars. The smoke from the destroyed drones drifted upward like fading ghosts, dissolving into the quiet night air. Leona walked slowly back toward the maintenance bay, her steps steady, unhurried, as though she hadn't just carried the weight of an entire airbase on her shoulders. Around her, Whispers followed, pilots speaking her name with a mixture of awe and guilt, officers murmuring about commendations, technicians staring like they were seeing her for the first time. But she didn't bask in any of it. Heroes usually didn't. She placed her wrench back onto the workbench, aligning it neatly with the rest of her tools. The same hands that had just operated a decades-old defense system with flawless precision now returned calmly to routine. That was the quiet truth about people like her. They didn't need applause to validate their worth. They didn't need spotlight or rank or recognition. They simply showed up, did the impossible when no one else could, and slipped back into the shadows like nothing happened. As night settled over Falcon Ridge, the last surviving drone fragment clattered harmlessly onto the concrete outside. Liana glanced toward the runway one more time, her expression unreadable. She had been called just a mechanic, dismissed, doubted, underestimated. But when it mattered most, when every second counted and every life depended on a single decision, she became the one the entire base relied on. She wiped the final trace of oil from her palms, tied her hair back, and returned to work. Some legends don't wear medals, some don't command troops, some don't even raise their voices, but when the world finally sees what they're capable of, it realizes something it should have understood all along. There are no justs when it comes to people who never fail to rise.